during that time, I will shortly introduce Jens. So as you know, I met him already in 2010, and it was really nice talking to him. He also became later then a member of our advisory board for the Catrobat Association. And this, I mean, it was always very inspiring to listen to his talks and presentations. And then I found out that actually he was a lawyer by education and just did this as a hobby. At that time, it was still called BYOB, build your own blocks, right? So he was now, I think you're working with SAP, the German company, and they are providing the funding also a little bit for the development of Snap. And I'm always amazed how much is done with Snap. It's a very open system and really fascinating. And I'm looking forward to Jens' presentation now. So please, Jens, if you want, I guess, Stephanie, can you stop the presentation and give the rights to Jens? And we are very happy to have you as our keynote speaker today.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang. Hello, good morning. I hope you all can hear me. I'm going to share my screen and let's see whether you can see my slides.
Works fine.
Great. Fine. So let me actually wait. There's a special way which I have to, oh gosh, play this in a window. And then, okay, so welcome, thank you. If I'm going to fidget around here, it's because parts of Zoom are blocking my view. So that might come in later. So I'm going to talk about angels, demons, and computational thinking. That's a reference to Dan Brown's novel that I think was called Illuminati in German. And you're going to see in a minute what that has to do with computational thinking. I hope I'm going to make this bold claim that I'm also going to show how you can express yourself fluently in Latin in less than 2 hours. Okay, wow, how's that for a keynote? So when we talk about computational thinking, I really don't know much about it. The first reference I found about computational thinking is in Mindstorms from Seymour Papert, towards the end of Mindstorms, where he talks about Samba schools. He more or less in passing mentions computational thinking as something that could be integrated into everyday life. And he doesn't define it much as McCarthy and Minsky did not define what artificial intelligence is when they made the Dartmouth proposal. But if you know Mindstorms, it really is about learning to program in Logo and coming from very concrete activities, like 20 things to do with the computer from Cynthia Solomon, and then to transfer this methodology elsewhere, to become a thinker about thinking and to learn about learning. So this is very much a kind of the vision that Papert had. And then kind of 26 years after, there's of course, the groundbreaking call to arms, the rally call from Jeanette Wing, where she also talks about computational thinking, and she gives the first shot at defining it, or at finding out what it could be. And so she mentions it's more than programming, but apparently less than all of computer science, and says it's something like thinking like a computer scientist. And so it's not about programming, but the ideas could be universally applicable. So there is also a kind of transfer, but not so much from the concrete to the abstract, but you take these abstract big ideas and you apply them elsewhere. And if you think about it, transfer, that's kind of the, the philosopher's stone of education. That's the thing everybody wants, and we're not alone with transfer. Because if you look, there's actually many things that promise transfer. One thing is Latin. I mean, if you look at every Latin, like why Latin page in the internet, it's about Latin teaches you how to think. Then there's a couple of years ago, chess was the big thing. Like if you learn chess, it will make you better in mathematics. And of course, programming, we've been saying it all along, like it teaches general problem solving. And that's kind of interesting. So here's just I wanted to show these websites actually, but just to make it quick, there's Latin, like why study Latin? You know, it sharpens the mind and it enhances problem solving. It leads to better grades, like in any subject. And successful people study Latin, like J.K. Rowling and Mark Zuckerberg, so must be good. There's another one that's an essay by Cheryl Lowe, and I really love that one. Like the most important reason of all is it makes learning anything easier. You learn how to learn, you learn how to think. Kind of sounds like Mindstorms, doesn't it? And there's an interesting explanation. Like she even says, you know, it's of course, because it's you are what you eat. And likewise, your mind becomes like what you study. And of course, Latin, that's logic, order, discipline, and structure. And it's interesting how they claim, like, you know, research shows that. Apparently there's an ample body of research that shows that Latin makes you better in other subjects. And I was particularly interested in this bullet point. It's apparently a great way to teach about computer programming. Mind you, we're talking about Latin. So here's Latin. Computer science is all about breaking codes, apparently. And Latin is just that. Translating from Latin is like breaking a code, so you can be a computer scientist who breaks code. And by the way, don't learn Python or JavaScript because they won't be the hot languages in a decade, but instead Latin will still be around. And Latin is great because you can't just start a sentence and then kind of think and make it up as you go along. So really, Latin is, oh yeah, and by the way, Zuckerberg also studies Latin, so must be great. So these are the promises that Latin gives us. And while I'm making fun of Latin, I'll be talking about Latin for most of the rest of the talk, so you can kind of think about what that means. So of course, all these transfer stories have to be seen critically, like the very evidence that apparently supports that Latin makes you better in any subject and fosters cognitive development. The very study, the long meta study, has actually shown that yes, Latin is beneficial for the one who learns it, like in their native language, it makes that better. But there is really no evidence that it makes learning any modern foreign language any easier. And there's also no evidence that supports that it has any impact on cognitive development. So likewise, in chess, that was a big thing. The very two researchers, Sala and Gobet, had a stunning kind of meta study where they found out that people who play chess actually perform way better in mathematics. And then when they tried it in reality with two experiments, they couldn't reproduce it. And so they said, well, let's not ditch maths for chess yet. It's actually, you should learn mathematics. And of course, in programming, this has been a bitter debate going back to the bank school study of P. Kurland Hawkins, that they couldn't find that, you know, learning to program in Logo makes you a better planner. It's not something that is intrinsic to programming. And the bitter debate that has come out of this, I think, has done more to harm the constructionist idea than the study itself. So transfer is this mythological thing. It's almost like a magic thing. And computational thinking is something that we hope will enable our audience to understand the realities around them. And the realities around us are much about technology. And so we hope that by learning to program, by applying computational thinking, our students will be able to tell magical claims, mythological ideas from technology. And so I don't know much about technology. As Wolfgang just mentioned, I'm a lawyer by training, so I know something about magic. So here's this book. I don't know whether you can see it, that I got on a flea market, and it's actually it's one of my favorite books. It's a Corpus Juris Civilis, a Roman law book. The edition that I have here is printed in Geneva in 1626, and it has something to say about magic. So there is a chapter about sorcerers, mathematicians, and the like. So it's interesting that mathematicians are at the same level as magicians and sorcerers. And, you know, it says it's actually worse to poison somebody than to kill them with a sword. And then it says something about geometry and mathematics. And it says, you know, geometry is something everybody should learn and exercise. It's in the public interest, but mathematics is damned and forbidden for all. And, you know, if you ask lawyers, they tell you that they didn't mean mathematics. They meant like astrology and fortune telling. But we'll see later that that might not be entirely true. So we kind of think about magic. You know, magic was a big thing in Renaissance. People believed they were magicians. It often involves transmutation of things. Like you can substitute one thing for another. You can instill knowledge in somebody. You can turn lead into gold, make a woman more beautiful, or cure an illness. There is some aspect where there's kind of secret rituals that are only known to the initiated, special objects, special powerful symbols, sigils, some incantations. And all of magical thinking really draws on these associations where things that occur together or that resemble each other somehow have a connection. And this is like where this "you are what you eat" also plays a big role. Or there are these associations, like if you want to make strong steel, you dip it into the blood of a strong animal. That's Saint Hildegard. And of course, you know, if something like a plant or herb looks like a body part, it might be the cure for that body part. And that's where actually many of the words that we have for plants come from, and where much of the poisoning that actually occurred also came from. And sometimes, oh yeah, this is also interesting. And another story, Athanasius Kircher, that's also kind of magical. When he was going to the region of Taranto in Apulia, he observed that, you know, when people were bitten with spiders, they kind of often danced. It was the beginning of the dancing sickness. And he wrote a book, Antidotum. The antidote to the sickness was, you know, you play this melody and you dance it. And this is actually where the dance, the tarantella, comes from. It is an antidote, is a cure for spider bites. And of course, magic also often involves, you know, spirits and ghosts. And there's actually a point, like some people back then said that, you know, if it involves ghosts, supernatural things, it's not real magic, or it's black magic, white magic. These are the ingredients of magic. And if you compare this, for example, like here, we're also transmuting numbers. This is Leibniz inventing binary numbers. There is kind of secret rituals. This is again Leibniz, you know, co-inventing calculus, and that looks very enigmatic. And again, Leibniz combinatorics is kind of very much like associations, and Leibniz even mentions that he got this idea from Ramon Lull, who was an alchemist. And if you've ever tried to find out what a monad is, you certainly believe in ghosts and spirits. So please meet Johanns Tritimius. Around the year 1500, he was born in Trittenheim, then he called himself Tritimius. He studied philosophy in Heidelberg. And 2 years after his studies, he kind of went home to his hometown, got into a snowstorm, and sought refuge in the Sponheim Abbey, which kind of was a quite powerful abbey at the time. And he liked the monks, and he decided, they were Benedictine monks. He decided to stay around. And after a year, the monks elected him abbot, the youngest abbot ever, at the age of 21. And he loved Sponheim. They had less than 50 books when he came there, and he read them all. He was, like, to call him a bookworm, a book lover would be understating it. He was crazy about books. He was so crazy about books that he started to write a book about books. He went meta on books. He put together all the names of the authors, sorted them in alphabetical order by their first name back then still. But not just the authors, but he also kind of wrote the first sentences of those books and the main ideas. And he invented the genre of bibliography. He is credited with being the first bibliographer, a whole genre. And he collected books all his life. So when he actually left, there were more than 2,000 books. And so it became the biggest library in all of Germany, and people from all over the world, all over Germany, went to Sponheim to do their research, to interact with Johannes, and to read his books. And in fact, after he went away, all the 2,000 books were moved to Heidelberg. They became the centerpiece of the famous Bibliotheca Palatina. And then a couple of years later, they were all brought to Rome and are the foundation of the Vatican Library, all because Johannes was such a book crazy person. So from Heidelberg, they took all his books, every book that Johannes wrote. He was kind of one of the best-selling authors of the time, and every book he collected except one. And the one book they didn't take was the one that he's notorious for. It's the one where you can see it's the art of occult writing, of speaking one's mind to persons far away. And he calls himself a wizard, a magician. And when the librarian in Heidelberg opened this book, this is kind of what they saw. This is a chant of conjuration, and it says like Dim Muriel Oniar Dabursoi Kohine Chamerson. It doesn't make any sense. And then there's more Latin, like if you complete this in the right way, the spirits will appear and be at your service. So this clearly was occultism at its worst, and they burned the autograph. They burned the only manuscript they had in the library. But in the years before, all the people who went to Sponheim to check on his library had already copied this book, the Steganographia. And so these manuscripts were far and wide around. So a couple of times later, the Catholic Church also started to adopt Johannes' way of writing books about books. And they also wrote a book about books, namely about books that should be burned. The infamous Index Librorum, the index of forbidden books. They also sorted it alphabetically by first names in the early version. And of course, they put Johannes right in there with this book. So Johannes' book was forbidden for 400 years. It was published 100 years after his death, and it was forbidden until the 20th century. Johannes afterwards wrote another book, the second book about secret writing, that is called the Polygraphia. And that book has less about magic, less about ghosts and spirits. It instead has tables and very clear instructions about steganography and cryptography. And it's the first instance where he takes all the Caesar ciphers that are possible, writes them underneath. So there's a tabula recta, a square table. And he's the first way to print this that is now known as the Divisionaire cipher, actually, but it was actually Johannes who invented it. And we're currently working on a MOOC, Yadka, Bernat, and I, where we'll tell you all about how to use these ciphers, and you'll get to do them all. I'm not going to show this all today. I'm just going to say that this way of what we call polyalphabetic substitution of letters has been the standard way well into the 20th century, well until after World War II. So it is really hard to underestimate the influence of Johannes. And you can really say that Johanns Tritimius is to Alan Turing what Moriarty is to Sherlock. So in his ciphers really they are a mixture of hiding things and scrambling things. And the key really is, if you know the secret incantation, if you know the algorithm, you can solve it. So that has to be obfuscated. The Polygraphia, the book that was not forbidden, is the first printed book on cryptography. So imagine that in that time. You could do two firsts in your life, like publish the first bibliography and publish the first book about cryptography. And so the Steganographia that I'm talking about here features all kinds of really claims how you can communicate without words, even without letters, without messengers, and how you can express yourself in Latin in just 2 hours if Johannes teaches you how to. It's also the first exit game, really, because each chapter is encrypted with a different code. And if you decrypt it, it gives you a hint of how to understand the next chapter. And in later editions, they actually had these cutouts, kind of these things where you see you had to, with a scissor, kind of, cut this out, and then you could have this thing and turn it, and you could see, oh, wow, this letter corresponds to this number. So it's really kind of the first exit game. And the third book is unfinished. There are no texts in there that can be decrypted, and it appears to be entirely about occult and magic. And if you look at YouTube, you'll see lots of people actually believing in the occultism of Tritimius even today, and they're going to kind of read it the way I read it and believe that, this is actually something that conjures up magic. So in this foreword to the third book, he says, this can be understood by reasonably educated people, but not by the Rapophagi, which literally translates to turnip eaters. And that's a little funny. Turnips have, of course, been the food of choice in Germany at that time. But the term Rapophagi was actually one that was used from the people in Palatinate to kind of mock the Bavarians. So this is an indicator really about a humorous way, same as that he just invents this philosopher Menastor, who apparently told him all this. So it's an indicator that maybe this isn't all about occultism, but it's more of like a practical joke. So nobody understood what's written in the third book of the Steganographia. The first one to try to solve it was Wolfgang Ernst Heidel, an aide to the Archbishop of Mainz, and he wanted to get the book off the forbidden index. He published an edition in which he explained everything about how to read this book and how it's not magic, how it's really just steganography, as it says. And he claims to have solved the third book, and he said, this is what it says. Nobody understood that because he used his own encryption method to say, this is the key. So, of course, what happened is the church also kind of put his book on the index, like, no, you can't, this is not the key. This is also forbidden. And it was there, like, this is even in the 20th century, like you couldn't have Wolfgang's book. Then, only a couple of years ago, like half a millennium later, mathematician Jim Reeds, from AT&T, later NSA, in earlier days, he also was a professor for statistics at Berkeley. He solved the ciphers in the book 3 quite easily, just using frequency analysis. And as he's about to publish it, he found out that Thomas Ernst, another professor, German in Pittsburgh, had solved it 2 years before, but kind of published it in some obscure journal. And Jim's essay really is fantastic. You should all read it. It's really nice. It's a good read. It's a nice exercise to do in class. So 2 years earlier, Thomas Ernst, not a mathematician, not a computer scientist, a Germanist, also solved the ciphers already. And then as he was solved them, he said, well, let's find out what Wolfgang solved before. And he found out that actually Wolfgang got it right and encoded it. So it has only been since kind of a little over 20 years that the secrets have been known. So let me show you what they did. This is Snap. This is the part of the third book of the steganography that we want to look at. Really, Jim's and Thomas's big thing was that they suspected that the code, the cipher, is not in the garbled stuff that Johannes wrote about angels and demons, but it's about the numbers. And there's actually a clue, because Johannes says that, you can communicate without words and letters. Get it? It's numbers. It's not words and letters. So the hardest part, really, when you have these old books, is transcribing it, getting it into a computer. So I've done that. This is this table. I can import the CSV, and so there's a bunch of numbers, but there's also a bunch of Greek stuff in there. And there's also another like letter alpha here that's somewhere outside. And the first thing that both of them really did was, if you read this from left top to bottom right, it starts with delta, then it goes to beta, and then it goes to gamma. That's not how the alphabet goes. The alphabet goes A, B, C. So the idea was maybe it's really the columns that you have to look at, not the rows. So let's try this. So we can look at the rows, maybe. Look at the columns. So now we have the columns. And there's something interesting. If you look now where the beta is, actually, this is all the rows are like 30 numbers wide, and the beta is in space 41. So maybe there's a way of you have to break these columns so that all the Greek words appear in one column. So Jim kind of wrote them underneath. We're going to do the same thing, like reshape this table so that it's 41 columns, 6, and now we have all the numbers nicely lined up with the Greek stuff the far right, and the first 4 columns have these Greek things. And when Thomas looked at these numbers, the same as Jim, he immediately noticed something, that, look at this, 650, 675, there's always 75 almost everywhere. Sometimes not, but most of these are exactly 25 numbers apart. So 25 is kind of an interesting number. So maybe 25, that's awfully close to 26, the alphabet. So maybe this is an alphabet. Let's try to make an alphabet of 25. And that's really a hard part. So now we 25. So we start with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, I. Then they didn't have J back then. They did not have K. L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U. They did not have V, but it turns out they had W. They had X. They did not have Y, but they also had Z. Wait, is this right? A, B, C. D, E,
Q is missing.
L, M. U is missing, right? No, wait. M, N, O,
Q.
P. Q is missing. Thank you. Q, R, S, T, U, V, X, Z. And then there's things that we don't know about. So there's maybe 1, 2, and 3. So this is an alphabet. Let's try to find out how this works. Make a variable alphabet. Oops. And assign it to this list. So now we have an alphabet. And what about we just take the first row and look at that? This is what Thomas did. Took the first row, and so now this is kind of the first row of numbers in its entirety. And Jim kind of made a frequency analysis of those numbers. And Thomas said he just immediately noticed there are 650 here, there are 650 here, there's 650 here and 650 here. That's a kind of funny coincidence of 650s. So he was suggesting that maybe this is really just your standard Caesar cipher. Maybe it's just your standard monoalphabetic substitution, where every number just stands for one letter in the alphabet. And maybe 650 is just the most common letter. So the most common letter in Latin is A, the most common letter in German is E. So maybe it is A. So if it is A, we should be able to just shift these numbers so that 650 becomes the first one in our alphabet. So we would be minus 649. So now this would be the first one, but all the other indices are negative. So the other possibility would be that maybe it's the last one, in which case we'd say minus 625. And so now kind of this would be number 25, but then it would have to be the last one. So if it was going to be the last one in the alphabet, maybe the simple way in which Johannes scrambled the alphabet was in which he just reversed it. So let's say the alphabet is just reversed. And now let's try to actually apply this. So now we can map over this. Now we can say, take the item of the number of the alphabet and see what comes out of this. And so Jim says in his paper that when he read this, it says Gaza, frequens, libicus. That sounds Latin. Duxit, then there's Ka, we don't know, Friago, Triumphos. So when he read Triumphos, he knew that maybe the occult secret wasn't so hard. There's actually triumph. So this could be Carthago. We can say maybe this is a diphthong. It's TH. Let's try this. And so he was onto something. So this is now the first of these rows. What about the second one? If we take the second one, remember these are all 25 apart. If we just take it like this, nothing comes out of this. But if we increase it by 25, we again get the number. And likewise for the third one. So basically Johannes encoded the same text Gaza frequency in different alphabets. Remember, he was kind of the inventors of polyalphabetic substitution. So this is an early form of polyalphabetic substitution. And so one thing how we can maybe do this more general is to say, what if it's really just a modulo of 25? And we're going to shift it so it applies to our alphabet that starts with the index 1. And there's one thing more. If you look at this, here there is a bunch of numbers that only have 2 digits. And Jim thought that maybe these were just delimiters for words. So we could say, what, if the length of the cipher is less than 3, it's just a space. Otherwise, it's just this. And we're going to have another map because we're using it on the whole table now. We take the columns of the table. And now let's see what comes out of this. This is actually kind of interesting. So now we have kind of a clear text of this whole table. It says a couple of times Gaza frequenz. By the way, Gaza frequenz libicus, that's what's called a pangram. It's a sentence in which every letter of the Latin alphabet is in. So he used that as a key to give a hint. And then later we see something like Liebe Getruve Hind die 12 ward unser heimliche vor der Porten Amen. That's like some garbled German, some secret message that's meet at the gate at 12. So now what we can do is maybe we could just turn this into a function. We could say, let's see, decipher the code. Say the code is kind of one of his lists. We can also say, how about we join all of this together? So we can output it as a name. Let's make sure we're taking any code. So this would be a function, how to decode it. Let's import Johannes in the game. And let's try to import another table, another enigmatic table, the motus planetarum purus. And let's try to have Johannes tell us what this means. So let's decipher the motus planetarum purus. And it says, Bringer des Briefs ist ein Boser. And then we don't know what this is. So it turns out that it's another diphthong. It's SCH. So if we complete our alphabet here, it says that the one who brings this letter is a bad guy. Beware of him. And then it sort of breaks off. So it's an example of another secret message. And thus, Jim and Thomas solved a century-old riddle, really. After half a millennium, it took them to finally find out all the secret thing and to actually discover that Johanns Tritimius was not an occult magician, but somebody who was really serious about hiding information in lots of hocus pocus. So why am I telling you this? Renaissance cryptology is really fun, This is something that feels like out of a Dan Brown novel, except that these are actual old texts that you can break with computing. The main difficulty is really transcribing them, getting them in digital form. But once they're there, they're really fun exercises, make for great programming projects, manipulating texts, working with ciphers, with numbers and information. It's a hugely fun and engaging activity. And the great thing is, these people from early Renaissance, they were polymaths. So everything you do really spans a lot of things. You can think about books, about literature, about architecture, art, and honestly, it's a way better use of Latin because it's way easier. This is like it's like the business English of Europeans today. Like they just wrote in order to make themselves understandable. So you'll get more mileage out of your Latin reading these books because that Latin is much more similar kind of to our languages today than if you read the classics. So what about learning Latin in a day? How does it actually work? And remember, Johannes said that he was teaching you how to express yourself fluently in Latin. So let me introduce you to the Hail Mary cipher. That's in the second book that he wrote about secret writing, the first printed book about cryptography. It's a 24-letter alphabet. For each letter, like this is the main part of the book, there are 383 substitution tables. And you take the first letter, the first column, the second letter, the second column. You just pick these words. Before the sixth column, you add suis in, and when you're done, you add amen. And then what comes out of this is actually sentences that make sense in Latin, that are semantically correct. And they look like a prayer, and they're syntactically also correct. So this is what it looks like. It's great thing is you can get all these things off the internet now. So these are the first 8 columns, and yeah, let me actually show you. So here's a Latin sentence. May the glorious Creator inspire eternal joy among his well-wishers. Amen. So this is kind of a prayer. I'm just going to copy this. And let me import I've prepared this project. This is the Hail Mary cipher. This is, here are the kind of 8 columns. And this is how this is the, like it splits it by word. It leaves out the 6th, 7th, and last word, and then it kind of iterates through all the columns and picks whichever letter it is. So here's this Latin sentence, condito gloriosus, and if you decipher it, out comes compute, and that's kind of really cool. Like if you take the word design and kind of do the reverse. This is kind of the reverse operation to encode it, like fill in suis in, end with amen. You take design, it says opifex magnus custodiens terram tribuat suis, and you can actually try to translate this. Here's the prayer. And if you, let's export this. Let's open this. And copy and paste it into Google Translate, which is an awesome tool for languages. The great craftsman guarding the land will give to his people in demand. Amen. So this is really a kind of amazing way to build sentences. So, this really reminded me, I think he's here, about Beat's fantastic Blafaser generator from a while back. And I thought, this is fun. Latin is great. So now you can actually express yourself in Latin. What about English? I tried to kind of do something similar in English, Hail Mary cipher, in which I made my own table of just 5 things where I put words that are frequently used. So let's encrypt using Hail Mary a pangram like Franz jagt im komplett verwahrlosten Taxi quer durch Bayern. That's kind of the German equivalent of the Gaza frequenz. Let's write this here. Oh, so see, this is what we get. It's evaluating creativity in open environments, combining data with ethical purposes, computing innovation as disruptive process. these are research proposals. So I've just taught you in 5 minutes how you can write research proposals that are fundable. Isn't that great? So actually, let's try Wolfgang. Wolfgang, what are your next tasks? Inspecting blocks with theoretical systems, exploring growth with novel blockchains. Wow, if that doesn't get funded, I don't know what. Well, this is fun. Something I've always wanted to know was an answer to a really, really pressing question. Is let's also use this Hail Mary to find out which blocks-based programming language, and that's 5, is best as beginner's language. That's a really important question. Of course, since I wrote the program, I already know that it's going to be Snap. Oh, look at that. Yeah, maybe Johannes was a magician after all, and this thing is jinxed. This, of course, is an early form reminiscent of what many generations later would be one of the driving factors for making the first programming language for children, Logo, this kind of sentence generating, and is really something that is deeply ingrained into the pedagogy of how computational thinking started today. So, kind of concluding these things, I'd like to suggest that when we talk about computational thinking, when we talk about programming, we should not use these arguments of dead languages to justify their existence. Come on, computing is squarely at the center of everything we do. We don't need to say, oh, but you can use this for something else. It's already cool if you can use it for everything you see around you. We don't have to apply it to other things. That's like an argument that might harm our purpose more than it benefits us. When we're talking about transfer, which seems so elusive and often to happen more in hindsight, it might be a good idea to design our lessons so that we draw very explicit connections from the things that are similar in different subjects, and we repeat them and we make it explicit to students rather than letting them discuss it on their own. I'm having a hard time understanding all the definitions of computational thinking. Sometimes I think it's easier to leave things a little in the mysterious. If a poet talks about love, it's more about that, yes, it exists, without having to actually define all the properties of it. So let's be easy on us. And but by all means, let's all program in history class. Let's all code in music class. Because coming back to the preface of Tritimius, if you look at the history of the half a millennium of this forbidden book, it really is a lesson in failed transfer. Because right at the beginning, Johannes says, no matter what you're going to read here, this is all good. I assure you, there's nothing bad in here. And he directly addresses the censor even and says, I implore you, I'm giving you everything you need to know, like even the how-to book. I implore you to first read it and first learn before you judge. And I think this is as good a motto for the year 1500 as it is for the 21st century. And with this, I close. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready to take a bunch of questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jens, for this totally fascinating and inspiring talk. I wasn't expecting anything in this direction, but as always, you fascinated and delivered something really awesome. So I have a bunch of questions, but first I want to ask questions from the audience. I think it's possible to just unmute you if you would like to ask a question, or you can also send, if you don't have a mic or it doesn't work for some reason, please send it to the chat. But yes, I see there's a lot of nice feedback, brilliant talk, bravo, super inspiring. So you get nice feedback already in the chat channel. Are there any questions? Please, don't hesitate. You have now the chance to, I mean, you can also ask Jens probably later in the WonderMe if you want to have a smaller, setting. But I just remember that I think 2 years ago, before the pandemic, we had a visiting professor from Germany, and totally different field from, he was invited by someone else, but we talked, of course, a little bit about our, coding for kids and so on. And he said, this is really interesting. My kids are now in high school and in Germany, and they have to learn programming, but there are no computer science teachers in Germany. And there are lots of teachers who do not have any good job anymore, Latin teachers. So they are now used for teaching programming to children in Germany. Because they are super suited for it, and they don't have anything to do anymore. So let's use them without any need for education for them, of course. Yeah. So that's the reality. One more thing is, in the afternoon today, there will be also a talk from one of our team about security and things that are a little bit reminding me of your talk. Yeah? So yeah. So anyone wants to ask some questions, please? Great chance now, and there are more people who wrote. Nice feedback. Absolutely amazing. So cool. I see many faces that I recognize. I'm very happy to have so many of you here. So any questions?
We have a question from Engin. Yes.
Yeah, hi everyone. Hi Jens, thank you so much for this inspiring talk. I wish this would have been on Monday morning, so I would have been inspired for the rest of the week. Because what I was thinking about in this whole process is about you and your role here in making this link between Snap as a tool, Latin, those key ideas, and how you sort of brought it all together. I was wondering whether you could talk more about the possible vision of the role that maybe people like us could also play, because it seems like what is a really important point here is this connector role, this person that is not just able to make explicit links to these similar ideas, but recognize them, interpret them also through the lens of the tool, for example, or the conceptual or actual tools that you've provided, and then make that such that this can actually become an experiential adventure in the classroom. So I was wondering whether you could talk about that.
Love to. Thank you. I really don't know anything about pedagogy. The thing that I do is I try to get myself worked up about a subject, and the more I read about something, the more I love it, and then these connections happen. But as I mentioned, these connections usually happen in hindsight. So right now we're just preparing this course, and it's actually a subject that I didn't like. So somebody else told us to do a course about data security and data protection. I don't know anything about data security and data protection. So I started Googling it, and then I came across these things. And so, but on the larger scope of things, I really believe that anything can be interesting if we're given enough time to find out these things. And so this is a huge effort. I've been agonizing over this talk for many, many weeks. And it's always a painful experience even, but I think it's something that is worthwhile. And I think it's something that I see as our duty almost as educators to come up with good examples, the German word Schulbeispiel, of examples that are good enough that we want to share them, that they transport something. And of course, for every good example, like when I prepared this talk, I think I have about 10 times as many things that I didn't show you that are sorted out. So this is as much about eclecticism, about being given the time. And I'm incredibly grateful to my employer that they give me the time that I can look at many, many things and then pick the ones that make the connections about something that I want to talk. And I wish every educator, at least everybody who works on curriculum, were given that resource. Because often what we see is that, the first thing you do is you turn it into a lesson and then you publish it. But it's only the first thing you do. It'd be great if you were given the time to actually do many of these things and try them out and iterate over them. So I think it's really not about being an intelligent person or about, I think everybody finds these things if given enough resources, if taken, pressure off their backs about delivering things that they don't like to do. And then it's really about one thing that I think, I don't know, I don't have any evidence, but there is one thing I suspect that in fact there is a secret ritual that makes transfer possible. I really think there is an alchemistic thing, that one thing that you can do to learn, and that is if you teach. I think you all who are teachers, if you prepare something to teach it to other people, you will be the one who will totally know everything about it. And so the big question to me is, how can we actually flip a classroom? Not in a way that we watch the videos first, but how can we flip it that instead of one teacher and 30 students, we have 30 teachers and one student, because then you actually learn something about it.
Thanks a lot. So what I hear is we should all try to get a job at SAP.
Oh yeah, definitely. Sure.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I was wondering what do you think would Johann have said about computers, programming, and Snap?
These early Renaissance folks were interested in so many things. He was apparently really a great speaker, a great talker. He was kind of also, if you read through these books and these letters, I see a lot of humor, but also a lot of kind of where humor went wrong, because people didn't get his jokes. And even though he said, it's just a joke. So it's a great example of how in the early days of the internet, in the early Renaissance, where you didn't have smileys and emoticons, lots of misunderstandings happened. So it's also great to see these kind of experiments out in the wild before the subject was really formed as such. People were just trying things, they were actually thinking they were magicians, and there was some magic. They were actually thinking that there is an alchemistic way in which you take things apart and put them back together again. And what they're doing here is, take information apart, distill the data from the meaning, then switch it to another meaning, even a text that has two meanings, and you have this kind of alchemistic thing where you have this two genders really in the text, like this double meaning thing. And I just love these experiments, and I think computers would have been something, had there been computers around Johannes' times, he wouldn't have written any of his books. He'd have done computer games all his life. Yeah.
Thank you very much again, Jens, for this wonderful talk. It was fascinating. I'm sure many people will hope to talk to you during WonderMe times in between. And yeah, thanks again. Fantastic talk. I think everyone enjoyed it very much.